The news hit like a plasma bolt to the skull. The Galactic Council had downgraded humanity to a level 0 species. Apparently, even plankton in the intergalactic ocean of irrelevance held more esteem. The announcement flickered across every holo screen in Solara, the Dyson sphere city orbiting the vestiges of a dying sun like a shiny, ignorant halo. Level 0, scoffed Doctor Jackson Kintara, swirling a questionable drink in a stained tumbler. We can't even get a level 1 participation trophy. What next? Compulsory helmets for morning walks. Jackson sat in his office, or what the Galactic Bureau of Diplomatic Affairs called an office. It was more of a closet with a viewport, and a view of the industrial sector smokestacks belching pollutants into the already murky atmosphere wasn't exactly scenic. The room smelled like desperation and last week's takeout. He liked it. It matched his mood. As a diplomatic envoy, one of humanity's few remaining links to the wider galaxy, Jackson was used to fighting uphill battles. But this was not a hill. It was the freaking Everest of bureaucratic humiliation. He ran a hand through his hair, which had the consistency of steel wool after too many nights of worrying about irrelevant alien politics and galactic snubs. Jackson, a voice crackled over the intercom, sounding like it had just escaped from a blender. You see the news? No, Martin, Jackson replied, his voice dripping sarcasm. I was busy napping in the blissful ignorance of our galactic superiority. Martin Trask, a fellow human diplomat and self-proclaimed connoisseur of interstellar cuisine, which mostly involved street food that could legally be classified as hazardous waste, burst into the room. We need to do something about this, he said, eyes wide with either panic or the aftereffects of alien chili. Do what exactly? Jackson asked, leaning back in his chair with the kind of reckless abandon only someone with a severely broken backrest could muster. Throw a tantrum, write a strongly worded letter, ask them nicely, and hope they downgrade us to level -1. He chuckled darkly, imagining the council members' reactions. They'd likely laugh so hard they'd spill their diplomacy cocktails all over their fancy robes. Martin flopped into a chair which squeaked in protest. We can't just sit on our hands. Why not? They've been sitting on theirs for centuries. The problem with the Galactic Council, Jackson mused, was that it was an ancient dinosaur of an institution, and humanity was the scrappy mammal trying to avoid being squashed underfoot. Not that the Council had actual feet. They were mostly a weird combination of tentacles, wings, and maybe a few parts that shouldn't anatomically exist. And what about the artifact? Martin continued, his tone shifting from desperation to something that resembled hope. The one everyone's racing to control. Ah, the artifact, Jackson said, as if it were some mythical creature he'd rather poke fun at than actually believe in. You mean the thing everyone thinks will solve all their problems but will probably only blow up in their faces? Exactly, Martin said, missing the sarcasm entirely. If we can get involved, it could change everything. Prove we're not just cosmic debris, Jackson sighed. And how do you propose we do that? Dress up like a level 5 species and crash their little artifact party? Martin leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I've got a lead, a contact. Oh, let me guess, Jackson said, rolling his eyes. A questionable source with questionable morals offering us questionable information for a questionable price, Martin grinned. Exactly. Jackson pinched the bridge of his nose. Fantastic. So, when do we meet this paragon of dubious virtue? Tonight, Martin replied, his grin widening to what could only be described as mildly unhinged. In the usual place. The usual place was a bar called the Event Horizon, aptly named because once you entered, you never truly escaped. Its clientele were as varied as the drinks, which ranged from mildly toxic to probably illegal in most star systems. When Jackson and Martin arrived, the place was buzzing with the kind of energy that said, "We're here to drown our sorrows and maybe start a fight." They found their contact in a shadowy corner, a Trescian named Corblax. It looked like someone had tried to draw a squid and a cat simultaneously, then decided, why not both? Its eyes blinked independently, an unnerving habit that made it difficult to tell if it was focusing on you or some existential crisis in the fifth dimension. "Ah, humans," Korblax said, voice sounding like a choir of frogs gargling marbles. "I hear you're looking to upgrade your societal status. Level 0 isn't doing it for us," Jackson replied. "We'd like to at least reach level still has hope." Korblax chuckled, or maybe it was choking, hard to tell with Trescians. "I have information, but it'll cost you." "Of course it will," Martin said, pretending to be surprised. "How much are we talking?" "A modest sum," Korblax said, naming a figure that made Martin's eyes almost pop out of his skull. "Modest if you're the Galactic Emperor," Jackson muttered. "Throw in a free drink and maybe we've got a deal." Korblax blinked again, both eyes this time. "All right, a drink it is." Now about the artifact. As the Trescian laid out the details, Jackson listened, mind racing with possibilities and pitfalls. It was dangerous, probably suicidal, but then again, so was being human in this galaxy. Maybe this was the opportunity they needed, or maybe it was just another trap. The conversation ended with a handshake, or whatever passed for one in this grimy dive, and Jackson and Martin left, ambitions mixed with a healthy dose of fear. Outside, the artificial lights of Solara flickered like stars pretending to have a purpose. "You think this'll work?" Martin asked, his voice a blend of hope and skepticism. Jackson shrugged. "Only one way to find out. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? We die horribly and end up as a cautionary tale." Jackson clapped him on the shoulder. "Exactly. And wouldn't that be a step up from obscurity?" As they walked back to the diplomatic sector, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that this was the start of something big. Something incredibly stupid, but big nonetheless. He just hoped that, when the cosmic dust settled, humanity wouldn't still be stuck at level 0, forgotten at the bottom of the universal pecking order. He glanced at Martin, who was muttering to himself about intergalactic politics and the price of vegan alien burgers. "Hey Martin, ever think we're just the punchline in some galactic joke?" Martin laughed, the kind of laugh that said he'd thought that very thing more times than he cared to admit. "If we are, let's make sure we're the ones laughing last." Jackson nodded, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Damn right. Let's go prove to the universe that humans are more than just cosmic punchlines." With that, they strode into the night, ready to take on the galaxy, or at least give it a run for its money. Because if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was turning the tables, even when the deck was stacked against them. For better or worse, they were going to make sure everyone knew what level 0 really stood for. Zero chance of giving up. Jackson's footsteps echoed down the sordid corridors of Solara's diplomatic quarter, where the atmosphere was a delicious cocktail of apathy and cigarette smoke. The place was crawling with representatives from every corner of the galaxy, all of them outranking Jackson in the interstellar hierarchy, but none of them enjoying it nearly as much as he did. He paused to admire a particularly irritatingly optimistic poster on the wall. "Work hard, level up." It depicted some nondescript alien species, grinning like it just won a lottery it never bought a ticket for. "Yeah, I'll get right on that," Jackson muttered. "As soon as I finish leveling up my patience with this bureaucratic hellhole." The task at hand was to navigate this labyrinthine mess of political intrigue and find allies, or at least someone who didn't want to step on humanity like a crushed soda can. The challenge was that Solara's diplomatic scene was as welcoming as a tax auditor at a birthday party. His first stop was a meeting with a representative from the Orcan Confederacy, known for their collective hive mind. It was like having a conversation with a particularly smug Wikipedia page, annoyingly comprehensive and prone to editing itself mid-sentence. "Dr. Kintara," greeted the Orcan representative, a blob of sentient goo that had adopted a humanoid form for the occasion. "I hear your species has been demoted." Yes, well, we thought it would add character, Jackson replied, trying not to gag on the Orkin scent, a mix of rotting kelp and broken dreams. So, any interest in a mutually beneficial arrangement? The Orkin quivered, its version of a shrug. The Confederacy prefers alliances with those possessing tangible influence. Jackson plastered on a grin that could have rivaled the most terrifying of clowns. Ah, influence. Just the thing I've been meaning to pick up on my next grocery run. With a dismissive ripple, the Orkin oozed out of the room, leaving Jackson to contemplate the futility of climbing a ladder that seemed to have fewer rungs every day. Next on his agenda was a rendezvous with a Grelzan dignitary, a species known for their love of rigid protocol and disdain for anyone lacking 2 or more of their 6 appendages. Jackson found them tucked away in a corner of the diplomatic lounge, a garish room with furniture that looked like a thrift store had vomited up a collection of mismatched sofas. Dr. Kintara, I hope you understand this meeting is informal, the Grelzan said, its voice a sibilant hiss that made Jackson wonder if it was planning to eat him. Sure, Jackson replied with a shrug. Informal, like a first date where the other person brings their parents along. The Grelzan's eyes blinked in sync, a rare display of their amusement, at least according to the Diplomatic Bureau's cultural cheat sheet. Your species' situation is most unenviable. We aim to be trendsetters in undesirable situations, Jackson said, figuring the Grelzan wouldn't appreciate the irony. He was right. The alien regarded him with the kind of expression usually reserved for things found stuck to the bottom of a boot. If you wish to improve your status, perhaps re-evaluation is necessary, the Grelzan suggested, which in diplomatic terms meant, get your act together. Jackson nodded, maintaining a facade of interest. Re-evaluation, of course. Why didn't we think of that? It's not like we're a species obsessed with constant self-improvement or anything. The meeting ended with the Grelzan's departure, leaving Jackson with the impression that he'd just been lectured by a particularly condescending squid. As Jackson navigated the winding halls back to his office, he found Martin waiting, pacing like a caged animal that had recently discovered caffeine. How'd it go? Martin asked, a grin plastered across his face that suggested his day had been equally terrible. Oh, splendid, Jackson replied, voice laced with sarcasm. We've been advised to reevaluate. Apparently, that's all it takes to go from intergalactic joke to a proud member of society. Martin nodded thoughtfully. Reevaluation, huh? So basically, turn your life into a self-help seminar. Exactly, Jackson said, collapsing into his chair. Maybe we should start a motivational speaking circuit. Level 0, why you should embrace mediocrity. Martin chuckled, but the laughter faded quickly. Any luck on the artifact front? About as much luck as a snowball in hell, Jackson replied. But our friend Corblax might have given us a lead. The problem is, we need allies, and right now everyone's treating us like a contagious disease. Martin frowned. That bad? Worse. At least with a disease they might feel sorry for you. Just then, a light blinked on Jackson's desk, signaling an incoming message. He tapped it, and a holographic projection flickered to life, displaying a woman with sharp features and eyes that seemed to pierce through the holoscreen itself. Dr. Kintara, she said, her voice smooth and confident, like a snake oil saleswoman who actually believed in her product. My name is Ilsa Veridian. I have information that might interest you. Jackson exchanged a look with Martin, their eyebrows doing a synchronized dance of skepticism and intrigue. Information about what? Jackson asked, leaning forward. The artifact, Ilsa replied, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. Its location and the players involved. Let's just say there's more at stake than you might think. Of course there is, Jackson muttered. Nothing like a touch of conspiracy to spice up a day already marinated in madness. Ilsa's smile widened. Meet me at Pier 17 in 2 hours and bring your associate. We'll discuss how you and your species can become more influential. The message ended abruptly, leaving Jackson to ponder the invitation. It was the kind of offer that screamed trap, but in their situation, ignoring it could be just as dangerous as accepting it. Pier 17, Martin said thoughtfully. Isn't that where all the smugglers and pirates hang out? Jackson nodded. Exactly the kind of place you'd expect to find a mysterious informant. What could possibly go wrong? Only everything, Martin said, though there was a flicker of excitement in his eyes. You think she's legit, legitimately dangerous probably. But if she knows something we don't, it's worth the risk. 2 hours later, they found themselves at Pier 17, a dank and desolate place where the air smelled like oil and broken dreams. The pier was a maze of rusted containers and precariously stacked cargo, a veritable playground for anyone with a penchant for danger or a death wish. Ilsa was waiting for them near a stack of crates, her presence somehow making the surrounding chaos look orderly by comparison. She was dressed in a sleek, dark outfit that seemed designed to blend into shadows, with a confident stance that suggested she could handle anything the galaxy threw at her. Dr. Kintara, Mr. Trask, she greeted them, nodding in turn. Thank you for coming. Not like we had much of a choice, Jackson replied, crossing his arms. Why the secrecy? Ilsa motioned for them to follow her deeper into the labyrinth of containers. Because the artifact isn't just a relic, it's a weapon, Jackson exhaled slowly. Of course it is. Because the universe wouldn't be interesting enough without a secret doomsday device lurking around. Ilsa glanced over her shoulder, a fleeting look of amusement crossing her face. It's more than that. It's a key to power that some would kill to possess. Jackson and Martin exchanged looks, their skepticism doing a tango with curiosity. And how do you fit into all this? Martin asked. I'm just someone with an interest in balance, Ilsa replied cryptically. I don't like the idea of any one species having unchecked power, especially not those who deal in chaos. Chaos, Jackson repeated. That's a broad term. Who exactly are we talking about? Ilsa stopped beside a cargo container, its surface dented and covered in symbols that looked suspiciously like a toddler's attempt at abstract art. There's a faction within the Galactic Council, Ilsa explained. They've been operating in the shadows, manipulating events to weaken certain species and elevate others. They want the artifact to cement their control. Jackson sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. So, it's politics as usual but with higher stakes. Precisely, Ilsa said. And you, Doctor, Kintara and your species are in their crosshairs. Your downgrade to level 0 is just the beginning. Jackson felt a chill run down his spine, though he kept his expression neutral. And why should we trust you? Ilsa's eyes met his, unwavering and intense. Because, unlike them, I have no interest in power, only in seeing that it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. Martin glanced at Jackson, his face a portrait of skepticism. This doesn't sound like a recipe for a peaceful resolution. No, Ilsa admitted, but it's a chance to change the narrative, to prove that humanity is more than just a footnote in the galactic records. Jackson mulled over her words, the weight of the galaxy's indifference pressing down on him. It was tempting, this offer of agency in a universe determined to ignore them. Dangerous, yes, but for a species relegated to the bottom rung, what choice did they have? All right, Jackson said finally, his voice steely. We're in. What's our next move? Ilsa smiled, a glimmer of approval in her gaze. We start by getting you into the artifact's circle of influence. And when the time comes, we level the playing field. As they left Pier 17, the path ahead uncertain and fraught with peril, Jackson couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Misplaced or not, it was better than the yawning abyss of level 0. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something bigger. Level 0, Martin mused as they walked. Who'd have thought it was the perfect launching pad? Jackson chuckled, the sound a mixture of determination and defiance. Let's just make sure we stick the landing. Jackson Kintara found himself in the sterile confines of Solara's diplomatic quarter, a place that somehow managed to smell like a combination of burnt coffee and apathy. He was trying to navigate the latest labyrinth of political intrigue, with all the enthusiasm of a man about to undergo a root canal without anesthesia. The mission of the day: assemble the ragtag team of humanity's finest, or at least those who could be bothered to answer his desperate calls. First on the list was Zeth Rylance, a tech-savvy engineer with a knack for turning obsolete tech into something that could blow up a small moon. He was currently holed up in a workshop that looked like it had been hit by a particularly vindictive typhoon. "Hey, Zeth," Jackson called out, stepping over what he hoped was an out-of-commission drone and not a sentient vacuum cleaner staging a coup. Zeth emerged from behind a stack of circuit boards, his hair styled by static electricity and what looked like 6 cups of coffee. "Jackson, just the man I wanted to see. You owe me 50 credits, 50 credits. For what? For that time I told you not to trust the Trelaxians and you went ahead and bought their foolproof cloaking device anyway. Remember how it cloaked itself?" Jackson sighed. "Fine. Put it on my tab. But first I need you for something slightly more important than my mounting debt." Zeth perked up, his interest visibly piqued. "What's the gig? We're on the hunt for an artifact. The kind that could shift the balance of power, or at least make us slightly less of a galactic punchline. Artifact, huh? Sounds like a party." "I'm in." Next stop was Mira Solon, a linguist with the charm of a cobra and the patience of a caffeinated ferret. She was ensconced in her office, surrounded by holo screens displaying what looked like the worst kind of gibberish, which, for her, was probably poetry. "Jackson," she said without looking up, "if you're here to ask me to translate another menu from Blorgen, I'm going to scream." Jackson chuckled. "Afraid not. This time I need you for something a bit more clandestine." "Clandestine? You mean illegal only if we get caught," Jackson replied with a grin that suggested he wasn't completely joking. Mira sighed, shutting down her screens with the resignation of someone who just realized they'd agreed to babysit a toddler with a drum kit. "All right, I'm in. But you owe me a decent meal. Not the usual space sludge you claim is authentic cuisine." With his team assembled, Jackson briefed them on the situation. They were about to embark on a journey that would put them squarely in the crosshairs of every major faction that had a stake in maintaining the status quo. And they were doing it as a species that had been recently downgraded to the universal equivalent of pond scum. "So when do we start?" Zeth asked, rubbing his hands together with the enthusiasm of a kid about to open a particularly dangerous toy. "Now," Jackson replied, "but keep your guard up. We've got enemies out there, and they're not exactly sending us fruit baskets." Their first major hurdle came sooner than expected. As they left the diplomatic quarter, a holo screen flickered to life above them, broadcasting a news report with all the subtlety of a slap in the face. "Breaking news: human envoys involved in espionage scandal," blared the headline, accompanied by an unflattering image of Jackson looking like he'd just been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. "Oh, fantastic," Mira muttered, crossing her arms. "We're celebrities. Can't believe they used that picture," Jackson grumbled. "I told them my good side was the left. Who did you piss off this time?" Zeth asked, shaking his head. "Pick a faction," Jackson replied. "But I'm guessing this is just the opening act to keep us distracted." The smear campaign was clearly designed to cast doubt on their mission, a tactic as old as politics itself. But they weren't going to let a little thing like defamation stop them. If anything, it just meant they were on the right track. "All right," Jackson said, determination setting his jaw. "Let's get to work. First, we need to secure a ship." "A ship?" Mira raised an eyebrow, because nothing says low profile like jetting around the galaxy in a stolen ride. "It's not stealing," Zeth corrected. "It's borrowing indefinitely." They made their way to Solara's docking bay, a cavernous space filled with ships of all shapes and sizes, from sleek fighters to bulky freighters. The challenge was picking one that wouldn't attract too much attention or explode mid-flight. "How about that one?" Mira suggested, pointing to a battered freighter that looked like it had been through several wars and a divorce. "Perfect," Jackson said. "Looks like it's held together with duct tape and prayers. Exactly what we need." As they approached the ship, A grizzled mechanic glanced up from his work, eyeing them suspiciously. "You lot need something. We're here for a test flight," Jackson said, flashing a smile that had been known to charm the occasional vending machine. The mechanic squinted. "You don't look like pilots, and you don't look like someone who cares about paperwork," Zeth chimed in, slipping the mechanic a handful of credits. "Let's just say we're taking it for a spin." With that, they boarded the freighter, Zeth immediately setting to work on bypassing security protocols. The ship's interior was as shabby as its exterior, but it would do. "All right, let's see what she's got," Zeth said, flipping switches and tapping screens like a conductor leading an orchestra of chaos. The engines rumbled to life, the ship shuddering as if waking from a long nap. They were off, soaring into the void with all the grace of a drunken albatross. "Next stop, the coordinates Ilsa gave us," Jackson said from the pilot's seat, gripping the controls like they might bite him. "Let's hope she's not leading us into a trap," Mira added, settling into her seat with a wary look. "Wouldn't be the first time," Zeth muttered, still tinkering with the ship systems. As they navigated the vast expanse of space, the freighter's comms crackled to life, an incoming message making its way through the static. "Attention, unauthorized vessel. This is the Orcan Confederacy. Identify yourselves or be prepared to be boarded." Jackson exchanged a glance with Mira, their expressions a mix of disbelief and resignation. "Of course, it's the Orcans. Because why wouldn't a blob of sentient goo want to ruin our day?" Zeth shrugged. "Could be worse. Could be the Trelaxians. At least the Orcans are polite about their threats." "All right, I'll handle this," Jackson said, activating the comms. "This is Dr. Jackson Kintara, human envoy. We're on a diplomatic mission. No need to slime us." There was a pause, the kind that usually preceded bad news. "Dr. Kintara, your vessel is not authorized for diplomatic missions. Prepare to be boarded." Jackson sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Why does everyone want to board us? We're not a piñata," Mira smirked. "Maybe they think we're hiding candy." With no other options, they prepared for the inevitable. The Orcans would board, likely looking for any excuse to confiscate their ship and haul them back to Solara in chains made of bureaucratic red tape. When the Orcan boarding party arrived, they were every bit as gelatinous as Jackson remembered. The lead Orcan, a particularly large blob with an air of authority, regarded them with the kind of disdain reserved for relatives who overstayed their welcome. "Dr. Kintara," the Orcan said, its voice a chorus of bubbles. "You have violated several protocols. We prefer the term flexible interpretation of guidelines," Jackson replied, his voice dripping with feigned innocence. "Your species' tendency for humor is noted," the Orcan said, though it sounded more like a threat than a compliment. "We aim to please," Mira said dryly, leaning against a console with practiced nonchalance. The Orcan shifted, its amorphous form making it hard to tell if it was annoyed or amused. "We will be conducting a thorough search." "Do not interfere. Wouldn't dream of it," Zeth said, stepping back with a flourish like a magician revealing an empty hat. The search was thorough, though ultimately futile. The Orcans found nothing of consequence, unless one counted Zeth's collection of questionable snacks and Mira's eclectic library of banned literature. "Your vessel is clear," the Orcan said finally, sounding almost disappointed. "But be warned, Dr. Kintara. Your actions are being watched." Jackson nodded, resisting the urge to make a sarcastic retort. "Noted. We'll make sure to wave next time." With that, the Orcans departed, leaving them to continue their mission with a renewed sense of urgency. They were one step closer to the artifact, but the path was still fraught with danger and uncertainty. "Close call," Zeth remarked, resuming his seat at the controls. "Think they bought it? They didn't have a choice," Jackson replied. "But we need to be careful. We're playing a dangerous game." "Always," Mira said with a wry smile. After all, who doesn't love a bit of danger? As they resumed their course, the weight of their task settled heavily on Jackson's shoulders. They were in over their heads, but the stakes were too high to back down now. The artifact was out there, a beacon of potential amid the chaos, and they had a chance to change everything. "Onward then," Jackson said, more to himself than anyone else. "Let's see where this rabbit hole leads. Hopefully somewhere with better company," Mira quipped, her eyes scanning the stars for signs of trouble. With their path set and determination fueling their efforts, they raced against time and fate, driven by the hope of proving humanity's worth in a galaxy that had all but written them off. And maybe, just maybe, they'd find a way to turn the tables on those who underestimated them. Level 0, Zeth mused as they sailed into the unknown. Not such a bad place to start after all. Jackson chuckled, the sound echoing through the freighter like a challenge to the universe itself. Not at all. Now let's see if we can make it count. The freighter hurtled through space with all the grace and elegance of a drunken uncle at a wedding, engines sputtering like a chain smoker on a treadmill. Jackson leaned back in the pilot's chair, eyes fixed on the holomap displaying their course to the derelict space station. He harbored the same enthusiasm as a man approaching a tax audit. "Remind me again why we're headed toward a wreck in the middle of nowhere?" Mira asked, arms folded and lips pursed like she was holding a lemon hostage. "Because treasure hunts are all the rage," Jackson replied, straight-faced. "And this obscure piece of junk might just be housing a fragment of the artifact." Zeth was sprawled across the co-pilot's seat, eyes glued to a data pad. "You know, they say that station is haunted. Ghosts of past incursions and all that melodrama. Probably just static from the faulty wiring, though." "Oh, great. I always wanted to be strangled by the specter of a failed electrician," Mira deadpanned, rolling her eyes. Just another day in paradise, Jackson mused, steering their rickety ride towards the coordinates Ilsa had provided. "If it turns out to be a wild goose chase, at least we'll have some peace and quiet. No diplomatic disasters, no sentient goo. Could use a break from the universe's worst game of hide and seek," Mira agreed, fiddling with her holster absent-mindedly. The station loomed into view, a hulking mass of forgotten steel and shattered dreams, floating idly in the void like the galaxy's least impressive art installation. Its lights flickered erratically, casting long shadows across its scarred hull. "Looks like a fixer-upper," Zeth commented, tapping away at his data pad. "Maybe we can flip it for a profit. Add it to our portfolio of bad decisions," Mira quipped. Docking was as smooth as it could be with a ship on the verge of disintegration. The freighter shuddered, groaned, and finally latched onto the station with a reluctant sigh. "Home sweet home," Jackson muttered, as they disembarked into the station's eerily quiet corridors. The air was stale, tinged with the scent of rust and old electricity, like someone had tried to distill the essence of neglect into perfume. "Welcome to the House of Horrors," Mira said, shivering slightly. "Any bets on how long until we bump into a homicidal AI or the ghost of engineers past?" Zeth added, grinning as he powered up his portable scanner. "Either way, I'm ready." Their footsteps echoed in the deserted halls, a rhythmic beat that was both comforting and unsettling. It was a place where whispers seemed to linger just out of earshot, where shadows danced at the edges of vision. Jackson paused, consulting his own scanner. "This way. We're picking up unusual energy readings from the lower levels. Could be our fragment, or could be the world's worst fuse box," Mira muttered, trailing behind. They navigated the labyrinth of corridors, passing rooms filled with the detritus of abandoned lives. Broken consoles, empty crates, a vending machine that had long since forgotten how to vend anything but disappointment. "Feel like I'm walking through an old war zone," Zeth remarked, peering into the darkened rooms. "There's history here. Sad, forgotten history. History's overrated," Jackson said. "I'm more interested in what it can do for our present." At last, they reached a reinforced door marked by faded symbols of a now-defunct corporation. The energy reading spiked, causing the scanners to whir indignantly. "This is it," Jackson said, feeling the thrill of discovery tempered by a healthy dose of skepticism. "Let's see what all the fuss is about." Zeth set to work on the door's control panel, fingers moving with the practiced ease of a man who'd bypassed more security systems than he cared to admit. Give me a sec. This old tech is more stubborn than a mule on tranquilizers. The door slid open with a reluctant groan, revealing a chamber bathed in the sickly glow of emergency lighting. In the center sat a pedestal, and on that pedestal, a fragment of the artifact. It was unimpressive at first glance, a chunk of polished metal with faint inscriptions that seemed to shimmer with a life of their own. Looks like a paperweight, Mira said, raising an eyebrow. We came all this way for that. Jackson approached the pedestal cautiously. Don't judge a book by its cover. This piece might hold the key to revolutionizing energy production. Imagine limitless power at our fingertips, or limitless headaches, Mira replied. You know, if the Galactic Council doesn't decide to shove it somewhere unpleasant. Zeth ran his scanner over the fragment, eyes widening as the readings displayed on his screen. Holy hell, these energy signatures are off the charts. No wonder everyone wants a piece of this. As if on cue, the station's comms crackled to life, broadcasting a message that was both unexpected and unwelcome. Attention, trespassers. This station is now under the control of the Syndicate of Arcane Endeavors. Surrender the artifact and prepare to be boarded. Ah, crap, Mira said, her hand instinctively reaching for her weapon. Of course, it couldn't just be a quiet day at the office. The Syndicate, Jackson repeated, his voice laced with a mix of disbelief and annoyance. Sounds like a self-help group for megalomaniacs, more like a nightmare dressed as a daydream, Zeth added. What's the plan, boss? Jackson took a deep breath, thoughts racing. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and the Syndicate weren't exactly known for their patience or mercy. Diplomacy would be their only weapon, unless they fancied a very short career as space debris. We talk, he said finally, meeting the eyes of his team, and hope they are the chatting kind. The Syndicate's boarding party arrived with all the subtlety of a tax collector at a bankrupt company's door. Clad in sleek armor, they filed into the chamber, weapons at the ready, eyes hidden behind dark visors. Their leader, a towering figure with a voice like grinding gears, stepped forward. Dr. Kintara, I presume. You're in possession of something that belongs to us. Depends on your perspective, Jackson replied, managing a smile that only slightly resembled a grimace. I was under the impression this was a derelict. Didn't see any reserved signs. The leader's lips curled in a humorless smile. Any object of value automatically defaults to ownership by the Syndicate. You can surrender peacefully, or we can make this unpleasant. Unpleasant is such a relative term, Mira interjected, her tone dripping with sarcasm. We're pretty comfortable with it. Jackson raised a hand before things escalated into a firefight. Now, no need for hostilities. We're reasonable people. How about a compromise? The Syndicate leader echoed, sounding as if Jackson had suggested they all break into a musical number. And what exactly do you propose? Jackson gestured to the fragment. We've got a piece of something valuable. You've got resources, influence. Surely there's a deal to be made that benefits both parties. The leader regarded him with the kind of scrutiny usually reserved for lab specimens. And what, pray tell, do humans have to offer? Creativity, Jackson said without missing a beat, and an uncanny ability to survive against the odds. You keep the fragment, sure, but let us work with you. Figure out how to harness its potential. A partnership with humans, the leader mused, as if sampling a vintage wine and finding it slightly off. An intriguing proposition. Zeth, sensing an opportunity, chimed in. Think of the possibilities. You could corner the market on energy solutions. We supply the brains, you supply the brawn, Mira nodded. And if things go south, you can always throw us under the bus. Figuratively speaking, the Syndicate leader considered them for a long, tension-filled moment. The silence stretched, and Jackson wondered if this was how his ancestors felt when trying to negotiate with a hungry predator. All right, the leader said finally. You have a deal. But if you cross us, there won't be anything left of you to throw under anything. Jackson extended a hand, hoping the gesture was universal enough not to spark an interstellar incident. You have my word. We'll make this work. The leader clasped Jackson's hand with a grip that implied breaking bones was a hobby. "Welcome to the Syndicate, Dr. Kintara. May your contribution be as valuable as you claim." As the Syndicate withdrew, leaving them in possession of the fragment under new terms, Jackson exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "That went better than expected," Zeth said, relief evident in his voice. Mira shot him a look. "Define better. We're now unofficially on the payroll of an alien crime syndicate." Jackson shrugged, grinning despite the odds. "Could be worse. We could be dead." "True," Mira conceded. "But let's not make a habit of cozying up to intergalactic mobsters." As they prepared to leave the station with the prize in hand, Jackson reflected on the precarious position they found themselves in. They were walking a tightrope over a pit of vipers, but there was no turning back now. "Onward then," he said, echoing his earlier sentiment. "We've got a galaxy to save, reputations to salvage, and possibly a new lease on life." Zeth chuckled. "Just another day in the life of a level 0 species, right?" Jackson nodded, feeling the weight of their choices, yet buoyed by the hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd find a way to prove their worth in a universe that thrived on chaos. "Exactly," he replied, guiding them back to the freighter. "Let's see what trouble we can stir up next." And with that, they set course for the unknown, ready to face whatever bizarre, dangerous wonder awaited them beyond the next star. "Well, that went sideways quicker than a Trelaxian on roller skates," Jackson grumbled, watching the syndicate ship disappear into the void with all the grace of a tax collector fleeing an audit. "So much for a peaceful partnership." Mira clutched the fragment like it was an unruly cat. "Can't say I'm surprised. Trusting the syndicate was like trusting a scorpion to babysit your kids." "Oh, I don't know," Zeth chimed in, eyes glued to his data pad. "I hear they make excellent role models in some circles. Just not ones you'd want to be part of." The freighter hummed around them, its engines crooning a mechanical lullaby that failed to soothe Jackson's frayed nerves. The syndicate had left them holding the proverbial bag, a bag filled with potentially explosive tech and no sympathy from the Galactic Council. "Got any bright ideas, fearless leader?" Mira asked, her sarcasm sharp enough to cut through the thick veil of impending doom. Jackson sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We head back to Solara. Maybe someone there will have a brainwave before we're downgraded to level -1 for incompetence." "Great. Just what I always wanted," Mira muttered. "A front row seat to humanity's spiral into galactic obscurity." The trip back to Solara was uneventful in the way that sitting in a dentist's waiting room was uneventful, full of dread about what came next. Jackson spent his time in the cockpit, staring at the holomap as if it might spontaneously offer directions to a miracle. Zeth, meanwhile, had buried himself in his data pad, muttering calculations that sounded suspiciously like a recipe for disaster. "If we adjust the fragment's energy output, we might be able to create a feedback loop." "Feedback loop," Mira echoed from the co-pilot seat. "That sounds like either a genius idea or the start of a really bad day." "Depends on your definition of bad day," Zeth replied with a grin more suited to a lottery winner than a man contemplating interstellar suicide. "Could fry us. Could fry the syndicate's comms. It's a toss-up. Let's save the heroics for after we survive the council's verdict," Jackson interjected. "We'll need all the brain cells we can muster to argue our way out of this one." The diplomatic quarter loomed as they docked, its sterile corridors welcoming them with all the warmth of a frosty handshake. It was the kind of place where optimism went to die, buried under layers of red tape and burnt coffee. As they made their way to the council chamber, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that they were marching to their own funeral. The air was thick with tension, each step echoing with the weight of humanity's future. Inside, the council was in full swing. Representatives from a dozen species argued with the fervor of hyperactive children on a sugar rush, each vying to outdo the other in blame-shifting and finger-pointing. "Ah, Dr. Kintara," intoned the council chair, a being resembling a sentient cactus with more thorns than friends. "We were just discussing your species' recent activities." Jackson forced a smile, hoping it didn't look as desperate as it felt. Always glad to be the topic of conversation. "Your actions," the chair continued, "have placed humanity in a precarious position. Possessing unregulated technology poses a grave threat. And yet here we are," Jackson replied, trying to keep the sarcasm from overtaking his common sense. "Still standing, despite the odds. Perhaps not for long," another representative, a gelatinous mass with a voice like a clogged drain, chimed in. "We must vote on whether humanity retains any standing within the council, because nothing screams civilization like a popularity contest," Mira whispered under her breath. The discussions continued, each council member taking turns to pontificate on humanity's perceived inadequacies. Jackson stole a glance at the holo screen, which displayed a live update on the impending vote. "Any bright ideas?" Mira asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jackson hesitated, knowing full well that anything he said could be the nail in their proverbial coffin. "Plan A, survive the vote. Plan B, start a new life as space nomads." Zeth leaned in, his expression more serious than usual. "We could show them the fragment's potential." "Sell it as a benefit, not a threat. Or a weapon," Mira countered and then added with a sigh, "but I suppose we've got nothing to lose at this point." When the chair signaled for Jackson to speak, he stepped forward, trying not to trip over his own bravado. "Esteemed council," he began, choosing his words with the care of a man defusing a bomb with his teeth. "We are not a threat. We are a resource. The fragment can revolutionize energy production, offer prosperity and innovation, or destruction," the gelatinous mass interrupted, oozing skepticism. "A path well trodden by humanity, like your record spotless," Mira muttered. Jackson pressed on undeterred. "We propose a partnership. Allow us to work under supervision, develop this technology for the benefit of all." A murmur spread through the chamber, an undercurrent of doubt mixed with intrigue. The chair's thorns rustled as if considering the proposal with something akin to interest. "And if you fail?" the chair asked, voice heavy with implications. Jackson met the chair's gaze with the steely resolve of a man who'd long ago accepted the galaxy's penchant for cosmic punches to the gut. "Then we accept the consequences. But we deserve the chance to prove ourselves." The vote commenced, each representative casting their decision with the gravity of a judge pronouncing a sentence. Jackson held his breath, the chamber's atmosphere winding tighter with every passing second. "And the result," the chair announced, its voice slicing through the tension like a rusty knife through butter. "In favor of granting humanity probationary status under strict oversight." Jackson's relief was palpable, a wave of reprieve washing over him. They'd been spared, but only just. The path ahead was fraught with the same perils, but now at least there was a path. "Congratulations," Mira said, her tone a mix of exhaustion and wry amusement. "We're not the galaxy's favorite species, but we're not kicking it to the curb just yet. Always nice to be tolerated," Zeth added, his relief masked by his usual sardonic grin. As they left the chamber, Jackson couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope amidst the cynicism. It was a small victory, one that came with its own set of strings and conditions, but a victory nonetheless. "Well, team," Jackson said once they were back aboard the freighter, preparing for their next step. "Looks like we've got our work cut out for us." Mira crossed her arms, her expression one of grim determination. "We either make this work or we become the cautionary tale they tell their kids. Nice to know we've got options," Zeth quipped, powering up the console. Jackson nodded, feeling the weight of their task but also the fire of possibility. They'd been given a chance, slim as it might be. And if there was anything humanity excelled at, it was making the most of slim chances. "Let's get to work," he said, determination etched into every word. "We've got a galaxy to prove wrong." And with that, they set course for the future, ready to face whatever bizarre, dangerous wonders awaited them beyond the next star. They sat in the cramped cockpit of the freighter as it maneuvered away from Solara, a lump of metal and hope in a galaxy that offered no handouts. The place smelled like burnt coffee and desperation, which might have been an improvement over the diplomatic quarter. Jackson Kintara, humanity's beleaguered envoy, was hunched over a console, glaring at Data like it owed him money. "All right, team," Jackson announced, trying for a tone of leadership and landing somewhere around exasperated substitute teacher. "We're working with a fragment that's more unstable than a Trelaxian at Happy Ior. We either crack its secrets, or we get toasted by the cosmic stovetop." "Toasting sounds appealing," Mira Solon replied, not even looking up from the data pad. "I could use a vacation from this reality." Zeth Rylance, their engineer and purveyor of lost causes, had his nose practically glued to his own data pad, fingers dancing like caffeinated spiders. "Good news is, I've found a line of code in this thing. Bad news is, it's in a language older than the Council's sense of humor." "That old, huh?" Mira quipped, leaning back in her seat as if it might somehow distance her from the looming disaster. The fragment they held was a piece of tech as mysterious as it was potentially lethal. Sold on the black market, it was rumored to be from an ancient race that made the Council look like toddlers fumbling around a playground. Jackson had a hunch, the kind born from too many cheap drinks and late-night desperation, that this was their ticket out of obscurity, or into oblivion. "So what's the plan, fearless leader?" Zeth asked, his tone dripping with the sort of respect usually reserved for used vacuum salesmen. "Figure out how to use this thing without blowing us and the freighter to space dust. Then sell the idea to the Council that we're not just a bunch of hairless monkeys playing with fire." Mira raised an eyebrow. "Selling it to the Council, that's almost as hard as selling sand to a desert." "You'd be surprised," Jackson deadpanned. "I've seen them buy worse." They settled into a rhythm that only desperation could inspire. Jackson and Mira worked on deciphering the code, a task akin to translating hieroglyphics with a broken Rosetta Stone and a hangover. Zeth tinkered with the hardware, each spark a step closer to either enlightenment or a fireball. The freighter hummed its mechanical lullaby, a sound almost comforting if you ignored the threat of imminent demise. Jackson, every bit the optimist in the way a pessimist might be if they hit their head hard enough, found himself staring at the characters as if sheer willpower could unravel their secrets. "Anything?" Mira asked, breaking the silence that had settled like a fog over the cockpit. "More cryptic than a politician's promise," Jackson replied. "But there's something." Here as in we're close, or here as in you finally lost it?" Zeth queried, peering over his data pad with a skeptical glance. "Closer than I'd like to admit," Jackson muttered, already feeling the weight of their predicament pressing down like a boot on his chest. "But I think there's a piece of code that looks like a command subroutine." "Command subroutine. Sounds fancy. Does it come with fries?" Mira's sarcasm was a familiar comfort, like a well-worn jacket that still fit even after all this time. Jackson chuckled, albeit without humor. "If it does, we're eating like kings." The code was ancient, older than most civilizations in the galaxy. It was a relic from the era before the Council, from a time when races like the Orcans, or, as Mira liked to call them, Space Jello, were still figuring out how to form coherent thoughts as one hive mind. The fragment had potential, a potential that could tip the scales in humanity's favor if they could just pry it open. "All right, I think I've got it," Zeth announced, a grin on his face that was more manic than reassuring. "There's a hidden function in this mess. Could be something power-related, maybe a self-sustaining energy loop. Translation: it could power a city or turn us into stardust," Mira asked, ever the skeptic. "More or less," Zeth replied. "But if we can harness it, maybe we can show the Council that we're more than just the cosmic punchline they see us as." Jackson took a deep breath, trying to steady the nerves that felt like they were playing a symphony of anxiety. "All right, let's see if we can make this thing dance without setting the floor on fire." The trio worked tirelessly, each failure a step closer to either a breakthrough or a breakdown. Every now and then, one of them would toss a sarcastic remark into the mix, because if they couldn't laugh, they might just cry. "Hey, maybe we should present this as a new form of entertainment," Mira suggested. "Watch humans gamble with ancient tech. Fun for the whole family. Bet we could sell tickets," Zeth added with a chuckle. Ior's turned into something resembling days, the only measure of time being the exhaustion etched into their faces. Yet, amidst the chaos, they began to see patterns, connections in the code that hinted at a greater purpose. Finally, Jackson leaned back, eyes wide with the kind of hope that bordered on insanity. I think we've got it." "What have we got?" Mira asked, though her tone suggested she already expected a half-baked scheme. "Imagine a power source that doesn't deplete," Jackson said, his voice tinged with excitement. "Something that could revolutionize energy production across the galaxy. If we can stabilize this, it changes everything." "Revolutionize," Mira echoed. "That's a big word for people who can't even get a decent seat at the council table." "Yeah, well, it's either that or try our luck with the Syndicate again," Jackson retorted. "And I've had enough of their brand of diplomacy." The realization of what they had hit like a shot of adrenaline, breathing life into their exhausted bodies. They might just have the key to turning the council's disdain into reluctant admiration, if not outright respect. "Guess that means we might live to see another day," Zeth said, unable to mask the relief in his voice. "Or at least another galactic crisis," Jackson replied, standing up and stretching out the kinks in his back. "But first, we need to make sure this thing doesn't blow up in our faces." "Good point," Mira added. "It's hard to negotiate when you're scattered across the cosmos." As they continued their work, a sense of camaraderie settled over them. They were the underdogs, humanity's last line against a galaxy that seemed hell-bent on leaving them in the dust. And if there was one thing they knew, it was how to fight when the odds were stacked against them. The fragment, once a symbol of their impending doom, now represented hope. It was a thin hope, like a thread dangling over an abyss, but it was enough to spark a fire within them. Their journey, fraught with danger and uncertainty, was far from over. Yet, for the first time, they had a direction, a purpose that might just save them from becoming a footnote in the annals of galactic history. "All right," Jackson said, his voice steady and determined. "Let's prove those bastards wrong." And with that, the freighter soared through the void, a beacon of defiance against a universe that never quite knew what to do with them. Jackson, Mira, and Zeth worked tirelessly to refine the fragment's capabilities. The task was daunting, a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing and the other half actively trying to kill them. But amidst the chaos, they found their rhythm, a symphony of clicks and whirs punctuated by the occasional curse as something sparked, or worse, didn't. "Who knew saving humanity involved so much tinkering?" Mira muttered, elbow deep in wires and circuits. "Could be worse," Zeth replied, his focus never wavering from the display. "We could be arguing about it in a council chamber instead." "True," Mira conceded. "At least here, when things explode, it's our fault." As they deciphered the fragment's intricacies, the atmosphere in the cockpit shifted. Gone was the pervasive dread, replaced by a cautious optimism that bordered on reckless. They were on the brink of something extraordinary, and despite the stakes, it was exhilarating. Iors bled into cycles as the trio pushed forward, each new discovery a step closer to salvation. Jackson watched as the fragment's potential slowly unfurled before them, an intricate web of possibilities that could redefine their place in the galaxy. "We're onto something big here," he said, barely able to contain his excitement. "If we can get this right, we'll be heroes," Zeth interrupted, a grin spreading across his face. "Or martyrs, depending on how things pan out." "Let's aim for heroes," Mira added dryly. "I hear they're less dead." Their work continued amidst bouts of banter and the occasional bout of existential dread. The fragment's secrets slowly revealed themselves, each breakthrough a reminder that they were more than just cosmic underdogs. Then, finally, the moment came. With a few last adjustments, the fragment stabilized, its once incomprehensible code now a symphony of order and potential. The freighter's systems hummed in harmony, the once volatile tech now a beacon of hope. "We did it," Jackson breathed, a sense of triumph washing over him. "We actually did it." "Now comes the hard part," Mira said, though even her skepticism couldn't hide the pride in her voice. "Convincing the galaxy we're not just a bunch of monkeys with a lucky break." "Good thing I like a challenge," Jackson replied, his resolve firm. "Let's show them what humanity is made of." With renewed determination, they set their sights on their next goal, presenting their findings to the Council and securing humanity's place among the stars. It wouldn't be easy, and the road ahead was fraught with danger, but for the first time in a long time they had a fighting chance. And if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was fighting against the odds. "Here we go," Jackson said, setting their course for Solara. "Let's change the galaxy." As the freighter hurtled through the void, the weight of their mission settled over them. They were the last line of defense, the sole voice in a galaxy that wasn't particularly keen on listening. But they had a chance, and that was all they needed. Together, they would carve a place for humanity among the stars, one snarky comment at a time. The freighter's engines hummed with an urgency that matched Jackson Kintara's determination. In the grim, metallic bowels of the ship, the ambient hum of machinery was punctuated by the occasional clatter of tools or the exasperated sigh of Mira Solon, who was currently eyeballing a panel of wires like it was a Trelaxian at an interstellar flea market. Untrustworthy at best, downright malicious at worst. "Zeth, if this thing decides to blow up and we vaporize into cosmic dust, I'm haunting you forever," Mira warned, her voice a mix of sarcasm and genuine concern. Zeth Rylance, ever the optimist in a galaxy that saw them as little more than advanced apes, chuckled from his perch over a datapad that was practically soldered to his hands at this point. "Relax, Mira. I've got us covered. Worst case, we just become an interesting footnote in some alien textbook. Humanity, the species that could but didn't." Jackson rubbed his temples. "I'd prefer to be a chapter, not a cautionary tale." "I'll settle for a paragraph," Mira muttered, finally closing the panel with a definitive snap. "A footnote just sounds insulting." The freighter bucked slightly as they entered Solara's gravitational field, the planet's sprawling diplomatic quarter looming ever closer. Jackson tried to ignore the itch at the back of his mind that told him the Council would rather see them in a zoo than a conference room. "Okay, folks," Jackson said, channeling every bit of authority he could muster. "Here's the play. We walk in, flaunt the artifact like it's the best thing since zero-gravity toilets, and demand humanity gets its seat back at the table. Simple, right?" Mira snorted. "Simple as a Trelaxian tax return. What's the backup plan when they laugh us out of the room?" "Then we threaten to take our ball and go home," Jackson replied, a wry smile creeping across his face. "And by ball, I mean the artifact." "Bet they'd love to have a shot at that." Zeth glanced up, an eyebrow raised. "You're betting the future of humanity on a bluff." "Why not?" Jackson shrugged. "Worked for my ancestors. Besides, we're humans. We come out swinging and hope the universe's jaw is still glass." With a collective deep breath that felt more like an exasperated sigh, the trio disembarked, the freighter's ramp hissing down onto the polished floors of the diplomatic quarter. The smell of burnt coffee and bureaucracy hit them like a physical wall, undercut by the unmistakable stench of desperation. "Ah, the smell of diplomacy," Mira quipped, wrinkling her nose. "It always does smell like something's burning." The council chamber was a dome of sterile perfection, a place where decisions were made with all the warmth of a glacier and the speed of a tectonic plate. Representatives from countless species gathered in their designated sections, each an embodiment of their distinct cultures, some elegant, others downright bizarre. But all eyes turned towards the humans, their presence more of a curiosity than anything else. "Let's give them a show, shall we?" Jackson whispered as they took their place at the human delegation's podium, which, rather tellingly, had accrued a fine layer of dust in their absence. The Orcan representative, a gelatinous mass that somehow managed to ooze authority, addressed them with the kind of condescension usually reserved for toddlers and malfunctioning robots. "Humans, you have requested this audience to present something of interest. Please proceed." Jackson cleared his throat, projecting confidence he didn't quite feel. "Thank you, esteemed members of the Council. Humanity may have been downgraded to a level 0 species. Level -0 if we're being honest," Mira added under her breath. "But we believe this artifact," Jackson continued, gesturing to the fragment now displayed on a holo screen, "can redefine the energy capacities for us all. Its potential is unmatched, capable of stabilizing even the most ambitious projects, like a Dyson sphere." A murmur rippled through the chamber. It was as if someone had just announced free drinks at the end of a long diplomatic summit. Interest peaked. The council shifted its collective gaze, assessing the artifact as if they could glean its secrets by sheer willpower alone. "Dyson sphere stability," the Orcan oozed, its gelatinous form undulating with curiosity. "That is indeed a remarkable claim." "Perhaps," Jackson conceded, "but one we're ready to back up. This isn't just a relic, it's a game changer." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a vibroblade. Then a voice from the back, a reptilian representative from the Frillac Consortium, hissed into the mix. "And what do you ask in return for this?" "Contribution, recognition," Jackson replied, letting the word hang in the air like a gauntlet. "A reversal of our species' downgrade and full reintegration into the Galactic Council. We want our seat back at the table." Another rumble of conversation. The suggestion was audacious, bordering on insane. But then again, humanity had always been an audacious, borderline insane species. It was practically their brand. "You're asking us to place a significant amount of trust in humanity," the Orcan replied, its voice both skeptical and intrigued. "Trust that has been tested in the past." "True," Zeth interjected, his voice even, "but consider this. Who else but humans would be crazy enough to take a shot at stabilizing a Dyson sphere? Our insanity is our strength." Mira nodded. "You don't want us in the galaxy's sandbox. Fine. But you're going to find that humans play best with others when we're allowed to bring our own toys." There was a certain logic to it, twisted and peppered with bravado as it was. The artifact was a bargaining chip unlike any other, and the council knew the value of a good card when they saw one. After what felt like an eternity, the Orcan gave a slow, contemplative undulation. "Very well, we shall deliberate. Humanity will have its chance to prove its worth once more." Jackson let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. It was a small victory, a crack in the council's stony facade, but it was enough. As they turned to leave the chamber, Mira glanced at Jackson, a smirk playing on her lips. "Well, that went better than expected. I didn't even have to use my emergency stash of sarcasm." Zeth chuckled, his relief palpable. "Let's hope we don't need it for the negotiations, but just in case, keep it handy." Out in the corridor, the tension of the chamber gave way to an exuberance that was hard to contain. They'd come a long way from being cosmic punchlines, and for the first time, the future felt like something they could shape rather than endure. "All right, team," Jackson said, his voice carrying the weight of hope and determination. "We've got a lot of work ahead, but if I know anything about humanity, it's that we're nothing if not persistent." "Persistent, stubborn, and a little bit insane," Mira added with a grin. Zeth nodded. "Sounds like a recipe for success." As they made their way back to the freighter, there was an unmistakable spring in their step. The galaxy was vast and unforgiving, but armed with the artifact and a newfound sense of purpose, they were ready to make their mark. "To humanity's resurgence," Jackson declared as they reached the ship, his voice filled with conviction. "May our legacy be more than just an amusing anecdote," Mira replied, the laughter in her voice infectious. With the freighter's engines roaring to life, they set off into the unknown, a tiny speck against the cosmic canvas but brighter than they'd ever been before. Their journey was far from over, but for the first time it felt like they were writing their own story. And what a story it was shaping up to be. The freighter hummed through the void, the engine's steady thrum like a comforting lie that everything was under control. Inside, Jackson Kintara leaned back in his chair with the air of a man who'd just conned the universe and gotten away with it, if only for a moment. "So," he said, addressing the room with a casual nonchalance that belied the chaos they'd narrowly avoided. "We did it. We actually did it." Mira Solon snorted, not looking up from the holo screen where she was running diagnostics. "Did what exactly?" "Convinced a bunch of intergalactic snobs that we aren't just monkeys with aspirations of grandeur." "Pretty much," Jackson replied, stretching his legs out with a satisfied groan. "That, and we managed not to get laughed out of the room, which I count as a win." Zeth Rylance looked up from his ever-present datapad, the blue glow casting shadows on his face. "Don't get too comfortable, folks. The council may have bought our story, but now we actually have to deliver on those promises. And here I thought we were done," Mira said with mock disappointment. "You mean we can't just ride off into the sunset with our newfound glory?" Jackson chuckled, shaking his head. "That's just the beginning, Mira. We've got to make sure humanity doesn't end up being a one-hit wonder. Like that band," Zeth chimed in, "from the 21st century. What were they called? The Archies or something?" "Isn't that a comic?" Mira asked, brow furrowing as she pulled up a different screen trying to find out what a comic even was in the archives. "Who the hell knows?" Jackson sighed, waving it off like an errant fly. "Point is, we've got to keep this momentum going. Can't have the galaxy thinking we're all bark and no bite." Zeth nodded, eyes returning to the stream of numbers and projections dancing across his datapad. "True enough, and we also need to consider who we can ally with moving forward. The Orcans are a start, but a single gelatinous ally isn't enough to secure our place." Mira finally turned her gaze away from the screen, her eyes sharp with intent. "Yeah, and we still need to figure out more about this artifact. We might have gotten ourselves a seat at the table, but if someone figures out we've been bluffing our way through with tech we don't fully understand, we're screwed." Jackson leaned forward, elbows on his knees, a serious look overtaking his features. "That's why we need to make sure we have a firm grasp on this thing. It's our ticket, and we can't let it out of our sight. Or blow up," Mira added dryly. "Wouldn't want an interstellar incident because it decided to self-destruct." "Yeah, let's skip the fireworks," Jackson agreed. "So, what's next on our grand tour of making humanity great again?" "Well," Zeth mused, tapping a few keys on his datapad, "we need to solidify our position with some tangible alliances." The Frillac Consortium expressed interest. "And there are a few smaller groups on the fringes who might be persuaded with the right incentives." Mira leaned back, crossing her arms. "Incentives like not getting obliterated by the first big threat that rolls through." "Exactly," Zeth said, a sardonic grin forming. "And maybe some enticing tech we might have access to." "Right, our mystery artifact," Mira quipped, mimicking air quotes with her fingers. "The thing everyone's drooling over that we barely know how to operate." "It'll have to do," Jackson said with a resigned shrug. "Besides, we're humans. We thrive on chaos and last-minute heroics. It's practically in our DNA." "Speaking of DNA," Mira interjected, "how's the whole Galactic Council accepting us without turning us into lab rats going?" "I'd like to keep my genetic code out of the spotlight, thank you very much," Jackson smirked. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. For now, let's focus on not getting tossed out the airlock." The conversation lulled as they each became lost in their thoughts, the possibilities of what lay ahead both daunting and thrilling. For the first time in a long while, the future seemed like an adventure rather than a death sentence. After a few moments, Jackson stood, stretching his arms above his head. "All right, team, let's get to work. We've got a galaxy to conquer or at least mildly impress. Preferably without any dismemberment," Mira added, standing to follow him. "Or explosions," Zeth reiterated, glancing back at his datapad. "Unless they're planned ones." With a shared sense of purpose, a rare commodity for their motley crew, They set about their respective tasks, each one committed to the cause of ensuring Earth's continued relevance in the cosmic hierarchy. The freighter continued its journey through the stars, a small but determined vessel carving out a path in a universe that had underestimated humanity one too many times. Time passed in a blur of activity and planning, the hum of the freighter a constant reminder of their motion forward, both literally and figuratively. As they neared their next destination, Jackson called the team together for a briefing, the sort of pep talk that was part motivational speech, part stand-up comedy routine. "All right, folks," he began, hands clasped behind his back as he paced the room. "We've got ourselves a meeting with the Frillac Consortium. They're a slippery bunch, but they've got resources we could use, and more importantly, they aren't inherently hostile to humans." "Always a plus," Mira muttered, scanning a report on her holo screen. "Last thing we need is another species trying to make coats out of our skin." Zeth, as usual, was engrossed in his datapad, but he chimed in nonetheless. "The Frillac are primarily interested in trade and technological advancements. If we can convince them we're worth the investment, it could solidify our foothold. And how do we convince a bunch of lizard folks that we're more than just potential boots?" Mira asked, skepticism heavy in her tone. "With charm, wit, and a bit of good old-fashioned human ingenuity," Jackson replied, a twinkle in his eye that suggested both confidence and a healthy disregard for the odds. "Practically our specialty," Mira said dryly, though her half-smile betrayed her amusement. "Exactly," Jackson agreed, tapping the side of his head. "We've got to stay sharp, stay unpredictable. The minute they think they've got us figured out is the minute we're done for. That's assuming they ever figure out what we're doing in the first place," Zeth pointed out, not looking up from his calculations. "Let's keep it that way," Jackson said with a wink. "Now, let's go show the Frillac what humanity is made of." As they prepared to dock with the Frillac station, a sprawling structure that resembled a giant reptilian eye, Jackson allowed himself a moment to reflect on how far they'd come. From a species that the galaxy barely tolerated to one that was on the cusp of forging new alliances and carving out a place among the stars. Not bad for a bunch of advanced apes. The docking procedure was smooth, which was a small blessing. They were greeted by a delegation of Frillac representatives, their reptilian features inscrutable, their movements precise. As they walked through the station's corridors, Mira leaned over to Jackson. "So, what's the plan if this goes south?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the clatter of claws on metal. "We run," Jackson replied with a grin. "Preferably towards the exit," Mira chuckled softly. "Good plan." The meeting room was a chamber of polished stone and alien technology, a blend of natural and synthetic that was oddly beautiful in its starkness. The Frillac leader, a tall figure with scales that shimmered in the light, addressed them with a low, rasping voice. "Humans," the leader began, eyes narrowing in what might have been curiosity or suspicion. "You seek to establish commerce and mutual benefit with the Frillac Consortium. What do you bring to the table?" Jackson took a breath, stepping forward with all the confidence he could muster. "Besides our charming personalities and delightful company," he quipped, earning a flicker of amusement from the Frillac leader. "We bring you access to technology that can enhance your energy grids, optimize resource management, and improve your trade routes." "And why should we trust you?" another Frillac asked, their voice a sibilant challenge. "Because," Mira interjected, "when it comes to making the impossible possible, nobody does it better than humans. We're stubborn, resourceful, and not afraid to get our hands dirty. We can be allies," Zeth added, eyes fixed on his datapad, "or at the very least business partners who can benefit from each other's strengths." The Frillac leader considered this, tapping a claw against their chin in thought. The silence stretched, tense and expectant, until finally the leader spoke. "Very well," they said, inclining their head. "We shall enter into a tentative agreement. Let your actions prove your words." Jackson released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, offering a nod of acknowledgement. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a step, a foot in the door, a chance to prove humanity's worth on a larger stage. As they made their way back to the freighter, Mira shook her head, her expression a mix of disbelief and satisfaction. "I can't believe that actually worked. Shows what you know," Jackson teased, patting her on the shoulder. "Never underestimate the power of human tenacity." "Or bullshit," Zeth added, finally tearing his eyes away from his datapad with a wry grin. "That too," Jackson agreed with a laugh. Back on the freighter, Jackson gathered his team once more, their collective energy crackling with the thrill of their recent success. They'd managed to secure another ally, another stepping stone on the path to securing humanity's place in the galaxy. "All right, team," Jackson said, his voice filled with a mixture of pride and determination. "We've got momentum on our side, and we're not stopping here. There's a whole galaxy out there just waiting to see what humanity can do." "And by see, you mean confuse and annoy?" Mira asked, her grin a testament to their shared sense of purpose. "Naturally," Jackson replied. "It's what we do best." With a renewed sense of determination, they set their sights on the next challenge, ready to face whatever the galaxy decided to throw their way. Humanity might have started as the underdogs, but they were well on their way to becoming a force to be reckoned with. And if they had to ruffle a few feathers, or scales, along the way, well, that was just part of the fun.